he doesn't seem to have disappeared altogether, but one never knows. I mean, the rumors were that he had been blamed for the breakdown in the negotiations over a possible summit in Budapest between Putin and Trump, and that it was his fault this didn't happen. But who knows? I mean, all sorts of people could be held responsible, and in the end, we don't really know whether Putin really wanted that summit.
Hello, welcome to Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. And today we're catching up with former Moscow correspondent and long-standing leader writer for The Times, Michael Binyon. Michael is an award-winning journalist and author of Life in Russia. Michael, welcome back to Frontline. Great to see you again.
Thank you, yes.
I'm really interested to get your insight into what is going on with the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. He was absent from last week's Security Council meeting where the resumption of nuclear testing was discussed. He was absent from the G20 delegation list for next month. And is everyone getting overexcited about all of this?
Well, I think they are. I mean, people do go absent from time to time. I mean, he may have simply been ill. He is 75 after all. And the Russians strongly denied that there was anything strange or untoward and that he was still in his office in the foreign ministry, still performing his duties. And he did make a statement after several days complaining about Britain's attitude and denouncing Britain's military support for Ukraine. He doesn't seem to have disappeared altogether, but one never knows. I mean, the rumors were that he had been blamed for the breakdown in the negotiations over a possible summit in Budapest between Putin and Trump, and that it was his fault this didn't happen. But who knows? I mean, all sorts of people could be held responsible, and in the end, we don't really know whether Putin really wanted that summit. So these things, I mean, people come and go. You never quite know. It was more difficult in the old days of communism, where you had to work out how close somebody was standing to the leaders, to how influential they were.
And now it's reported, though, that Sergei Lavrov is ready to meet US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. How much has it been perhaps about Russia waiting for a gain like Pokrovsk in Ukraine on the battlefield so that it can posture this idea that Russia is winning?
Well, I think that's important. I think that's what all this stalling has been all about, because the Russians are about to take the really key target on the Eastern Front, which is Pokrovsk. That's the real prize that the battles have been all about. And the Ukrainians are still fighting a desperate action to try to hold on to this line and in particular this city. And if the Russians can show that they are actually winning and advancing steadily along the Eastern Front, then they have a much stronger card to play, and they might be ready for some kind of compromise in the hope that the Ukrainians would begin to lose heart and are ready to more or less accept whatever the Russian conditions are.
Yeah, and as you say, Russia perhaps looking for a stronger hand to play. And what you've written about today in your leader on Ukraine, it's struggling to defend itself now against Russian attacks on its energy infrastructure. And there's this massive scandal that's erupted over an alleged corruption scheme, suspected of diverting around $100 million from that very sector. It's exactly the kind of scandal that would play into the hands of Putin if he wants to spin that Ukraine is not a country worth backing financially.
It is indeed, and it is extremely unfortunate and a real blow to President Zelensky's standing, particularly as this organization set up to investigate corruption, NABU as it's called, was closing in on some of the people involved until a few months ago, Mr. Zelensky actually proposed taking over charge of this investigation so that it would be under his supervision and that he could therefore presumably either halt or accelerate investigations. And that caused a massive row, and he was forced to back down and let this body remain fully independent. And of course, that has damaged him particularly when it now seems that he proposed curbing the powers of this body just as they were closing in on some of the key people who have now been named as figures in the Ukrainian energy sector who were profiting from this huge scam, $100 billion worth of illegal siphoning off of money.
That's the allegation at the moment, of course. But importantly, President Zelensky is supporting this investigation, isn't he?
Oh, yes, indeed. I mean, I think he's been hurt and damaged, and he knows it, and it's a sign of the fact that his own government is not fully united. There are quarrels and ambitions and splits and whatever. But he has come out very strongly saying anyone who has been found guilty of corruption or any kind of impropriety should pay the full penalty and should go to prison. And indeed, the Prime Minister of Ukraine has just suspended the Justice Secretary, Galushenko, as somebody who appears to have been named in this corruption scandal.
So how critical do you think this is a moment for President Zelensky's presidency?
I think it's very critical because one thing that has always been known about Ukraine is that they do have a bit of a problem with corruption. I would say, a bit is a bit of an understatement. They've had one of the worst records of all post-Soviet countries of corruption and of embezzlement and of nepotism and of all the sort of shenanigans that went on certainly in Soviet times, but seem to have been just as bad during Ukraine's independence. And those have been highlighted by Ukraine's Western friends and allies. The European Union has made it absolutely clear there's no question of Ukraine joining the European Union or even coming much closer until it really cleans up its act and makes sure that the government is not subject to corruption. And I think the very same thing is true if NATO ever invites Ukraine to be a member, which I'm beginning to doubt whether that would happen. But if they did, there would be absolute precondition that they end all corruption. And in fact, to his credit, Mr. Zelensky has been trying to do that, but he's up against a system that's been there in place for some long time. And habits of corruption are deeply ingrained. And of course, it doesn't do Ukraine's reputation any good, particularly among those Western countries where he's asking them to fund Ukraine in its struggle against Russia and to pay for new weapons. And if they do that, people will say, well, the money is just going into the various people's pockets.
Let's turn to life in Russia now. What is your assessment? Have the effects of sanctions, the Ukrainian tax on its oil refineries, the manpower shortages, the creaking economy, have they reached the elite circles yet?
It's very hard to tell. You get all these different and sometimes conflicting reports. Various people and economists say the Russian economy is holding up. They're finding creative ways to get around sanctions. They've managed to keep their oil supplies flowing, their oil exports, that is, even though there have been new US sanctions on those buying Russian oil. They still have a whole fleet of shadowy ships that transport oil to their export markets. But nevertheless, it's clear that inflation is quite high still, and it's beginning to affect those in St. Petersburg and Moscow, namely the middle classes, who are the ones who can make the most noise and start complaining about things. The Russians have very adroitly managed to substitute different imports for those consumer goods that were immediately unavailable after the imposition of Western sanctions. So on a day-to-day basis, I don't think very many Russians are feeling that this is a sort of crisis situation. But in the long term, everybody is saying it's extremely bad for the economy. All the investment is going into defense. A lot of very key people, the big brains of the younger generation, have fled abroad, although some have come back. And the level of business confidence is pretty low. So long term, it doesn't look good at all. But it's hard to tell to how much pain the middle class is really suffering and how much that reflects in what's being said to Putin.
And what do you think it would take? What level of disruption would it take to mobilize them, those elite circles, and to do something about it?
Well, of course, that suggests that the elite circles are able to tell Putin what to do. And I'm not sure that's true at all. He's able to tell them what to do. He is still very much in charge. The Russian system is built so that the president has all power and can preempt any kind of revolt or any kind of pressure from those around him. And he can respond by pretty rough treatment to those people he thinks disloyal. There's no sign yet that there is an incipient revolt against him. If there is a change, it will come very suddenly and very unexpectedly. That's how things move in Russia. Things stay pretty much the same. Somebody has total power until suddenly it's all over. And that we can't really anticipate when or how or indeed whether that would actually happen.
What about, I mean, you said earlier that in terms of daily life, it's not really being felt at the moment. But in terms of the cost of living or access to public services, how's that being felt?
Well, yes, that is being felt. Prices have risen considerably, and inflation is quite high. And Russians are angry and grumbling about that. And there are certain things they can't get hold of easily that they used to before. But yes, the cost of living is high. People are finding jobs hard to come by. All the money is going to the military, and unless you're prepared to sign up to the army, you don't have a chance of getting a really good salary anymore. And I think there's clearly discontent, and that's there, but it's kept well under the surface because the level of control and repression is pretty high. I mean, Russians don't feel that they can easily come out and complain and express their feelings without suffering possible measures against them.
I'm just interested what you think about the Kremlin having publicized the fact that early next month Putin will meet the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to discuss wider migration to Russia to plug workforce shortages. Is it unusual to actually go public on this? Is it the need for a good news story to actually deal with the workforce problems they have at the moment?
Well, I think it's certainly important that Putin is shown that he is perfectly able to travel to other large countries, and that the international criminal courts sanction on him and the demand that he be arrested wherever he lands isn't having an effect or not curbing where he wants to go. He's obviously been to China many times. India is a long-standing and important ally, both politically and economically. And of course, India has become under considerable pressure from Donald Trump over its import of Russian oil. And the Americans have slapped huge sanctions on India, which has infuriated them. Now, of course, these could be renegotiated. You never know with Mr. Trump's tariffs. I meant tariffs, sorry, not sanctions. He slapped tariffs on them, and that has angered them considerably. But nevertheless, they do have close and long-standing ties with Russia, particularly in the defense sector, where they're looking to buy Sukhoi 7 fighter jets. And I think Mr. Putin is telling the world that he's going to India in December, early December, I think, and that he's free to do so, and that he is still making close friends around the world, and in particular with the world's largest country by population. And that matters. Whether or not India sends people to join the workforce, I'm not sure what will be announced. That might be necessary, but it wouldn't be terribly popular within Russia. I mean, they're not very open to immigration from outside any more than many people in Western Europe are.
So that per se would not be a good news story in Russia.
Well, not really, but the fact that he's going to to India, and that he's actually going to do deals there and renew a friendship with India, and Modi looks as though he's very prepared to give Putin a decent welcome. I mean, all that will play into the Kremlin's message, we're not a pariah.
All that posturing to show influence and power and to have allies. I'm just wondering on Kazakhstan, how that will be going down with President Putin, given the fact that Donald Trump has announced that this Central Asian country has agreed to sign the Abraham Accords to normalize relations with Israel, and showing that he is having an influence in that country. Can you tell me what kind of tug of war is going on over those Central Asian states?
Well, it is a real tug of war, and there's all to play for there. Kazakhstan is a large, very large and important country, which has traditionally been very closely aligned with Russia, even after breaking away from the Soviet Union. And the Russians are very jealous of their large influence and a large number of Russian speakers in Kazakhstan. And they've been somewhat alarmed by the inroads that China has been making into Kazakhstan, both in trade and in political influence. And then all of a sudden along comes Donald Trump, who suddenly invites the leaders of Central Asia to America, 5 of them, to go and meet Donald Trump, signs up Kazakhstan for the so-called Abraham Accords, which is, in fact, more gesture than reality. The Abraham Accords are the accords negotiated between Arab countries and Israel, allowing mutual recognition. Well, Kazakhstan has always recognized Israel. It doesn't mean that they're suddenly going to join those who've had poor relations with Israel, but the idea of aligning themselves with these other countries, such as Gulf countries and Morocco and others, I mean, that is a bit of a coup for President Trump. But it's clearly viewed with some alarm in Moscow. And there seems to be a state visit going on right now between the president, or President Tokayev, who's going to Russia to meet Putin. And I think they're making all efforts to show that Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries are still within the fold.
So you're expecting perhaps some kind of political statement to come from that meeting?
Well, almost certainly, yes. And I mean, Kazakhstan has played a pretty clever game. Since the fall of the late last president, who held power for many, many years, there has been a certain fluidity in Kazakh politics, and it can't be taken for granted that it will be automatically aligned with Russia, or indeed that it will go over to China. They're a big country. They've got important minerals and exports, and they are reasonably prosperous. And I think they're playing with the game for whatever they can get from it.
Just to return to something you said earlier about change when it comes to Russia, it comes very suddenly. And this has been said by other people before as well, that it's often fast, short, unexpected. What kind of conditions might you look for? I mean, I said unexpected, but is there anything you can look out for to signify that it may be potentially around the corner?
Well, I think it's if the feeling that the Ukraine war has hit a dead end and that it's not going to lead anywhere, and that all this huge sacrifice, I mean, the number of people killed is absolutely enormous, far, far more than those who were killed in Afghanistan. If that feeling suddenly leads to discontent within the Army High Command and within the Ministry of Defense, that this war is being badly conducted and that it's costing too much, and that the strategic objectives either aren't being won or are not worth winning, and that the commanders are being blamed for failures of corruption within the army, which is always there, failures of strategy, failures of political initiative, then I think there might suddenly be a real level of discontent, feeling this is going wrong. And who would coordinate that level? It's almost impossible to say. You can't point a finger at anyone. All those around President Putin are as hardline as he is, apparently, and as committed to the war as he is, though one wonders whether opportunistically some might think, actually, if we make a sudden switch, I could benefit from this. And that's how these things go. It's the way they plotted the overthrow of Khrushchev all those years ago, 1964. And that was plotted within the Politburo. Now he was suddenly simply dismissed. And nobody saw this coming. But obviously those within the Politburo had been talking among themselves for some time. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. And we don't know what sort of conversations are going on among those key figures within the Putin administration, and what sort of view they have of how the war is going.
Do you think President Putin can actually end the war, or is it actually necessary for his political and personal survival?
Well, he's got to declare some sort of victory. He can end the war. He can end the war if he gets a deal on his terms. And he's made that pretty clear, both in Alaska and in talks or preliminary talks about the failed summit that didn't happen in Budapest. He says these are the conditions. And basically, he's set out each time that he wants all the Donbass, not just the amount of territory that the Russians now occupy, but the rest of those two provinces, Luhansk and Donbass. He wants that recognized as Russian territory, and Crimea, of course. And he wants Ukraine to promise never to join NATO. He's got all these conditions he laid out in Alaska, which essentially is the full, the whole lot all at once. It's a preemptive surrender by Ukraine. And he doesn't seem to have changed those demands at all. Now, if he gets some of them or all of them, then he can say, well, we've achieved our objective. And in particular, if it's recognized that Ukraine can't or won't join NATO, that's been the key demand, and that NATO is never going to invite Ukraine to be a member. And then he could portray that as all this was a victory, and Ukraine is now closely aligned with the mother country, which has always been his intention. If he can show that, then he can stop the war.
But then he stops the war and he has the problem of all of those soldiers who've been mobilized tens of thousands of battle-hardened soldiers, injured soldiers. Where are they going to go?
Ah, well, that is always a problem, yes. And they might be pretty disillusioned. I mean, they have had a rough war, lots of them killed, many of them injured, some pretty unpleasant and horrible conditions on the front line. We're hearing about individual cases of soldiers who've been bullied or sent in as cannon fodder and managed to survive, or, some pretty brutal experiences. And they come home, as you say, battle-hardened, very bitter, some of them. They might have some money because they are being paid quite well, but you begin to think, how are they going to be reabsorbed into civilian life? And it doesn't look that easy.
Michael Binyon, it's been really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Gerbeau. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.